Hello world, it's Dave again, and I'm going to be creating a new series for my channel now on a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is reading. I used to read a great deal when I was very young, something I'm grateful to have done, and for a long period of life I've been out of it, and then maybe in the last while come back to it a bit more because as I've traveled, it's just something that you can do when you spend so much time alone. It's interesting, it occupies time. And as I've read more, I've thought very differently about my experience with reading, and I think that fictional reading particularly has been misunderstood as to how we explain it to children and its importance, or to anyone really when we talk about enjoying fictional works. Because the focus, I think, has been put too much on pure enjoyment of something, just like you might enjoy watching a movie or you enjoy eating some food. We focus on the pleasure of the experience as opposed to all these other things that are occurring that could be beneficial to us. And so, like the title suggests, I'm going to try and discuss the idea that there is truth in your fiction. And I have a number of different points that I'm going to try and build this idea with. So first and foremost comes out of visualization, and it will then link to the others. Now, visualization is something I have a greatest connection with when I discuss something like rowing, let's say. Rowing was something that I did in my youth and was a really demanding sport, and I did it competitively, and so there was a lot of pressure to perform in all the different places that we went to and competed. And one of the things that was very important about our races before we would do them, one of the important aspects of our races was that before we would race, we would visualize. And I know that any athlete watching this has probably had a similar experience where they've been told to visualize what they're going to do beforehand. You know, in our case, it would be thinking about the beginning of the race. It would be thinking about, you know, as much as the whistle blowing, focusing on the exertion that you would have to put yourself through, all the different little nitty-gritty aspects, your technique, everything like this. And I found that this really helped. I did. When I did it, I felt like it granted me some clarity when we came to the actual event, and I found it useful. Now, studies have been done, and they suggest that the brain activity which occurs when you are visualizing a race or some sort of athletic event, the brain activity that occurs is not much different at all from the actual brain activity occurring for you as you go through the event itself. And so what this suggests is that the brain does not know the difference between literal experience and visualized experience. And so you can imagine how this pertains to a book, in that as you read it and you're imagining these different relationships and scenarios that are occurring, you're imagining them, you're visualizing them. And so for all intents and purposes, if you read a book that has to do with a guy who suffers a horrible, tragic loss, maybe he loses a child, maybe a relationship, you know, death in the family, all these different things that can occur, there is some truth to be said that you are actually experiencing what it might be like for someone to go through something like that. And so you're immediately starting to broaden your perspective as a result of your reading. And it's not just enjoyment that you're getting from this then, it's as though you're living more than one life as you read this book. And the more books that you read, the more lives you have lived. Now, the next point that I want to then connect this to is kind of the main point of this video. You know, that other thing, visualization, it being something we've realized is it's far closer than we thought to the actual experience. It's something you may have heard before, but I feel my next thing is original, or somewhat. And it's the idea that the greatest problem with fiction is that we keep calling it that. And fiction, by its definition, is unreal. It's something that never happened. And I've started to have a major problem with this, because as I read more and more books that are classed as fiction, I realize that the truths that I learn from them are entirely real. And in fact, they're deeply connected to universal truths that have existed since human history began, whether you wrote your book back in Bram Stoker's era or you're Margaret Atwood writing some new cool book now. There are truths that can be found of the human condition that are always going to be true. And so then to define a book as entirely fiction, I suppose you have to, because the characters in it technically, they never existed, but the experiences that you draw from them are very real. And that's why I like to make that point about visualization, because when you say that you visualize a race and you haven't done it yet, somebody says that's a fictional race in your head. But the point I've just made is that your brain doesn't know the difference between the two. As far as your brain's concerned, both are real, both are enacted in your mind in the exact same way. And so when you read a book and you learn that it's horrible to treat someone in a particular way, or that you should have a better work ethic, or you should have, that you should dream big and not feel limited by naysayers and people that say that you aren't capable of following whatever dream you might have. That's as real as if you went to a seminar with somebody and sat down and they actually told you that. Now, you would say that the seminar that you went to was real and that's non-fiction, but maybe the experience of that is written far better in a book, even though it's defined as fiction. And so the question then comes, which has greater value? I would say the one that is classed as fiction, but was presented in a far better way. And so you can see right there the incredible value in books. You can learn lessons that have existed for thousands of years in human history, but you can be reading, the Blade Runner adaptation, Durandroid's Dream of Electronic Sheep, and be learning about humanity while some guy has a pet electronic sheep that definitely doesn't exist in our world, but it would give you a true understanding of what it is for someone to rely on something that is not actually real to remind them of their own humanity. Whether you read it in a book or you're experiencing it in your life, your brain doesn't know the difference, and so that's kind of what matters. And I don't want to make these rants too long, so I'll come to kind of a final point, and that was just to talk about, of course, this is the discussion about books and reading, so I'm going to mention a few books. A book I really, really enjoyed, I'm a big fan of Nightmare Future books, is 1984. And one of the ideas that they discuss in 1984 is newspeak. And newspeak is an ever-evolving dictionary that the regime in power has. The serfs, the people under the government, the people who are living in terror, always writing and updating as a form of new language, but restrictive language, where all they're trying to accomplish is saying things with less. Now, I kind of like the idea that if you can't say something simply, then you don't know it well enough. I agree with that idea. But I still do believe alongside that with more words and a greater ability to articulate ourselves, we can imagine and do much, much more. It is dangerous to think that the best way to speak is with the fewest words as possible. And like this book demonstrates, it can be a form of control. If you can only articulate yourself with 5 or 6 words, you're not going to have a very big perspective, not a very big world inside your head. And it's no surprise, I think, that when you meet people who might be, fairly ignorant, that all they do is curse and swear all the time because they have no imagination beyond those words. And then you think of how negative those words are. And from their perspective, you can see why the world's kind of a negative place. They don't have beautiful words to enhance their experience of the world. It's just these curses and swears that they would use all the time. And so, if you read more, you develop your vocabulary, you can articulate better, you don't get stuck in being not able to express yourself properly. And I think then to go beyond that, not just that you can't be controlled as much, if you read more, if you develop your vocabulary, then you can also dream bigger, because words are an expression of emotion, and then in that way an expression of a greater perspective. Emotion and words very much linked, but words kind of give grounding to the emotional experiences that we go through and kind of give us anchors so we just don't lose that emotion as something that is unreal. You know, if you felt lugubrious, if you felt excessively mournful or sad, it'd be useful to be able to have a word that you associated with that, because if you didn't, then you might just call it sad. But that's not the same thing, is it? You know, you can be sad or you can be lugubrious. You can be really, really sad. And sometimes it doesn't do it justice just to say really, 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 and add on these words, these qualifying words to make that one word that you know even better. So whether you're getting a job, whether you're an artist who wants to write good songs, I guess in that case it's very literal, it is an incredible advantage to be able to read and know more and have a greater vocabulary. So that's kind of the end of this video. I'm going to try and keep these in a range to 10 to 15 minutes, something like that. And unlike the other videos I do, I'm going to try and make a book recommendation, of course, because this is about reading. And I'd like to do a little quote, because I love quotes. Who doesn't love quotes? And so I will read from my handy little e-reader. I could do like a little episode on why these things are awesome. I will do a quote now from one of my favorite books I've read recently that is by Margaret Atwood, called Oryx Crake. And this is about a nightmare future where kind of, you know, genetic manipulations run out of control. And so the quote goes, "And we must be a beacon of hope, because if you tell people there's nothing they can do, they will do worse than nothing." So that's something for your brain to chew on for a little bit. I think it's real good. If you have any questions, if you want to make suggestions for me for books to read or anything about something that could be discussed in this series, I'm going to put my email information below. So please respond, comment, and I would really appreciate that. And if you like what you see as well, please subscribe to the channel, because this is going to be an ongoing series, as I will continually read books, whether it's recommendations or general discussion of the topic itself. I will continue with it. So like I like to say, thanks for tripping with Dave, and until next time, world, ciao for now.